I am Mama, as you know, and we are live on Substack. The cafe is open. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's so lovely to have you. Please pull up your comfy chair or your beanbag, grab your warm milky drink or your adult beverage, and wrap yourself in your snuggliest blanket or stick yourself in front of the fan, whichever is appropriate. And I'll begin. Oh, Nita, I'm so sorry. I hate to say, Nita, it's getting to the stage where it's almost like wherever you are in America, something has happened in your backyard. I know it's a big country, but there's a lot of bad shit happening. Oh my God. Ilibi says he was here from Colombia with an SSN and was legal, and they murdered him. Oh, and Betsy read an article about a family of 4 children who've had both parents imprisoned in those concentration camps. Just, shall we get on? Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome to any new mamacitas in the chat, and welcome back to all of you who've been here before. Thank you all for showing up and making it so that I'm not just going through this by myself, because I think it's important that we know we are the ones that are right thinking, and the void or the conflicting messages are not what everybody thinks. So before we begin, a care note. Tonight's show is about 4 recent deaths in the United States, including one investigated as a suicide and 2 others for context. I will be careful and there will be nothing graphic, but if tonight is not the night for you to sit with this, that is absolutely okay. Please look after yourself first and come back to us when you're ready. And if you are struggling yourself, please, please reach out. In the UK, the best place is the Samaritans, and they are contactable in the UK on 116 123. That's the Samaritans on 116 123. And if you're in the US, you can call or text 988 anytime, day or night. That's the US. Call or text 988. Okay. Deep breath, my loves. So, I want to start tonight with a murder I'm really not going to cover. I'm just going to mention. And when you're all ready, I will get started. Last Wednesday, at around 12:30 in the afternoon, Illyby, yes, that will be coming up. Thanks to Laura. A lot of this is thanks to Laura. Last Wednesday at around 12:30 in the afternoon, a 78-year-old woman was attacked in her home on her own on the edge of Dartmoor, and she died of her injuries. Her name was Anne Widdicombe. If you're in the UK, you'll know exactly who she was. She was a Conservative Party MP for more than 20 years. She was Prisons Minister under Prime Minister John Major and later became a Brexit Party MEP, member of the European Parliament. And most recently, the immigration spokeswoman for Reform UK. Now, she and I, let us say, would not have agreed about very much. She was incredibly kind to animals. So we got that, you know? There's always something that we have in common, however hard you have to look. None of that matters, whether she was a person I absolutely adored and cherished, or whether she was somebody that I actually quite hated. She was neither. I thought she seemed like a game old bird. I disagreed with an awful lot of her politics. You know, nothing's ever black or white. It's very, very grey. But none of that matters because a woman was murdered in her own home, an elderly woman, and that is a horror, whatever her politics. And my heart goes out to the people who loved her. Here's why I raise her. I had thought this week that I might cover her killing, and then I realized I really don't need to because everyone is. Yeah, Vicky, have your baby, have your baby, have your dinner. Anyone who's needing to have a baby, you should definitely go do that. You can come back to this, but yes, please go have your dinner, my darling. Yeah. So I thought I might cover her killing, but everybody's covering it. So within 3 days of her death being discovered, there was a murder investigation moving, in the police's own words, at significant pace. There were arrests. There was a statement from the sitting prime minister calling it shocking and urging the country to come together. There was a counter-terrorism assessment to rule terrorism in or out or shake it all about, because they ruled it out and now they're ruling it back in again. But you would want, if new evidence appears, you would want the picture to change with it and the assessment to change with it. And that's what's happened. There was no evidence to indicate it was terror related. Now there is evidence that suggests it may be. So counter-terrorism are running point on this particular investigation. But there's been wall-to-wall coverage, the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, and across the Atlantic on your side as well, CBS, PBS, Al Jazeera, a nation mobilized correctly, the way a nation should when someone is killed. That is what it's supposed to look like. And I want to be completely clear. I am not begrudging Anne Widdecombe 1 second of that response. It is right. It is exactly right. I raise her because she's going to be our measuring stick. Because tonight I want to tell you about 4 other people who died in America in these same few weeks. And I want you to keep that speed, that seriousness, that wall of attention in the front of your mind as I do. And I want us to answer one simple question together, or at least think about one simple question together. Sit with it honestly. Why do some deaths command all of that and other deaths get crickets? Is it the celebrity of the thing? Is it that Anne Widdecombe was a public figure and the 4 that we're going to cover were not? That is a real answer and we will take it seriously. But is it something else? Hold the question. Don't answer it just yet. Let's meet the 4 people first, and we'll come back to the question at the very end when we've got the whole picture in front of it. And just to be clear, there are 2 deaths I will not be touching on. 1, Senator Lindsey Graham. I have mentioned the news as it broke. I have upset somebody on Substack who I thought was a friend, and I'm truly sorry. I've apologized publicly and I've apologized privately. I was just sharing the breaking news and I wanted it not to be, and I knew that Senator Lindsey Graham has not a lot of popularity for good reason. And I didn't want my area to be the space where people started fighting each other. You know, don't be disrespectful, but he was an asshole. I just didn't want that. But it came across, I believe, from what I've been told, as though I was telling people how to feel. And that is absolutely unacceptable. You feel however you need to feel. Your feelings are valid, 100% valid. And I never ever want you to feel like I'm trying to tell you how to feel about something, because I am not. I am 100% here to tell you that whatever you are feeling is valid. So don't let anybody ever make you feel that way. And I hope that my apology has been taken with the sincerity that it was meant. And the reason why I will not be covering it on tonight's show is because I actually, putting my cards on the table and respecting the fact that he has died and that will be painful to some friends and family of his. I hate Lindsey Graham. I think he's a despicable human being. I think he's been instrumental in some of the absolute worst atrocities that have befallen my American friends and American people I don't know. And on top of that, he supports a genocidal regime in Israel that have murdered thousands and thousands of little children and innocent people. And I think that is absolutely disgusting. I despise the man, and I am very, very not giving two shits that he is no longer breathing air. That's all. That's all. Oh, Neuro, can you tell us? Can you tell us? Can you tell us who? Can you spill the tea? You know, we like a little bit of gossip here, but you know, only that what we could substantiate. Yeah, no. Horrible, horrible man. Undoubtable. But if you liked him, you're entitled to feel that way as well. You're probably not here because we tend to have the same morals and values and ethics in this little community. And it's unlikely that somebody who thinks the same way as Lindsey Graham thinks the same way as us, because those two things do not meet. I'm also not going to talk about the death or not death of one Mitch McConnell. He is absolutely 100%, as has been proven by that extremely convincing photograph, alive, and therefore completely fair game for us to rip the piss out of to our heart's content. If he does pass away, I will have a respectful moment of silence where I don't rip the piss out of him, but I also will shed no tears when that evil bastard shuffles off this mortal coil. There we go. Are we good? Are we good? Oh, Julie Rodzinski. Yes, yes. No, I read a few things and I responded to Chris Resists, bless his little cotton socks, and told him that I think he's fabulous and she should go fuck herself. I didn't actually say that, but I did tell him I think he's fabulous. So yeah, yeah. Who gives a fuck about Graham and McConnell? Not us, because here are four people that we do give a fuck about. So as of recording, these stories are still moving. As I said, counterterrorism have taken over the Anne Widdecombe inquiry. They have made an arrest, 28-year-old man who's been arrested on suspicion of murder. He's also been re-arrested on suspicion of terrorist offences. It's with the Home Secretary and being we're being updated as is appropriate. Oh, I'll check out Evie as well. Yes, I think I saw something from Evie too, Neuro. Thank you. I'll go back and check that. So, who are we going to talk about tonight? These are the names. Let's listen carefully, because if you haven't heard all four of these names, maybe just have a think. I wonder why that is. That's right. Yes, Dr. Eric was saying on Glenn last night that Mitch is very much still alive. So, fair game as far as I'm concerned. Right. Back to the names that we do give a shit about. Nolan Xavier Wells, 18 years old. Tania Nicole Miller, 27 years old. Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, 52 years old. Tyrone Johnson, 20 years old. Four people, four American deaths in the space of 3 weeks. A teenager on an island, a young woman in a park, a father driving his crew to work, a father running down a street at 4 a.m. Not one of them got the week that Anne Widdecombe rightly got. Let's find out what they did get. So, first I make a covenant to you. Hey, Summer. Before a single case, I owe you the rules of tonight because this subject is a minefield of grief and rumour, and this cafe does not add to either. So here is our covenant, and I will hold myself to it out loud. Tonight, I will not tell you who killed anyone. I will not speculate about murders the evidence does not show. I will not repeat internet theories. And where a viral claim is contradicted by the record, I will tell you that too, even when it is inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. We don't say it if we can't show it, and that cuts in every direction. You know that. That rule applies to the news that broke this weekend. Oh, enough said about that. You know that there are conspiracy theories going on about Senator Graham, and most of them are being spread by the Loomer that we don't listen to. We only listen to the not Loomer, not the not Loomer. Okay? Let that be your mantra. Not Loomer, not Loomer. Not Loomer. Yeah. Not Loomer, not Loomer. I think that's clear, isn't it? As mud. So what I will do is I will apply the sniff test. And the sniff test is not a test of who done it. It's a test of process. When somebody dies, the living are owed certain things. A real investigation before a conclusion. Evidence shown, not just asserted. Names, footage, timelines, autopsies. Answers that arrive before the press release does. When those things are missing, you don't need a conspiracy theory to be troubled. You just need a nose. Because a conclusion without its workings is not an answer. It's an instruction to stop asking. And tonight, 4 times over, we are going to decline that instruction politely with receipts. I know, Anne, right? How dramatic of us to demand an investigation into sudden and unexplained deaths. I know. So, one more thing, and it matters. In every one of these cases, the people asking the loudest questions are not anonymous accounts. They are mothers, sisters, sons, state senators, the NAACP, the president of Mexico. When that many serious people are asking you to show your workings, showing your workings is not a courtesy. It is the job. Okay? Case 1. Nolan Wells, the boy who didn't come back on the boat. Let me tell you who Nolan Wells was from what I've been able to ascertain. Because he was somebody long before he was a story. Nolan Xavier Wells, 18 years old, from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a middle-class, majority-white town on the Gulf Coast. He was a wide receiver, good enough to play college football at Southwest Mississippi Community College. His old high school coach called him an outstanding young man, the kind of son, teammate, friend, and student every coach hopes to have. That was Nolan. On the evening of the 3rd of July, he made his family salmon for dinner. That was Nolan. He told his mum he loved her. That was Nolan. And then he left to spend the night with friends ahead of the holiday. That was Nolan. Her words, Mum's words. It was a hug, kiss, and he left. She never saw him again. And as a mum, that kills me. Here's the timeline as established by reporting from CNN, NPR, and PBS. On the 4th of July, Nolan set out with a group of friends by boat to Horn Island, a popular barrier reef off the Mississippi coast. The kind of trip Gulf Coast kids make all the time, no big deal. In the photos from that boat, Nolan towers over the group, arms slung around the shoulders, smiling. He appears to be the only black young man in a largely white group. That afternoon, the boat came back to the dock. Nolan was not on it. His family reported him missing that night. A friend's son also called the Coast Guard, and a search began. On Monday, the 6th of July, just Monday last week, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department recovered his body on the island. Now, the official posture, and this is where the sniff test starts twitching. The sheriff's office announced in a press release that it is investigating this as a death, not a homicide. So sit with that sentence. No cause of death has been announced. The state medical examiner is still waiting on toxicology to finalize the autopsy. And yet, the category was declared first. Nobody knows yet how this poor boy died, but we've already been told what it isn't. That is a conclusion traveling ahead of its evidence, and it's precisely the pattern you're going to hear 4 times tonight. CNN put its finger on something true when it wrote that the photos from that boat have become a kind of Rorschach test for American race relations in 2026. Millions of people looked at a picture of one black teenager smiling among a largely white group on a Mississippi island and saw joy, a friendship, multiculturalism, an ordinary 4th of July. Millions of others looked at the same pixels and felt their stomachs drop. Because history taught their families that exact picture is a warning. Neither group is being hysterical. They're reading the same image through different archives. And Mississippi's archive is not subtle. When Ben Crump, civil rights attorney, says this is the state where Emmett Till was lynched, he's not reaching for a cheap line. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy visiting Mississippi in 1955. His killers were acquitted by an all-white jury in 67 minutes and then sold their confession to a magazine. That is part of the reason why a black family in Mississippi does not receive the words "nothing to see here" as reassurance. The state spent a century teaching them what those words can cover up. And the unanswered questions are not internet inventions. They're in the mainstream reporting, what little there is. Why did the boat leave the island without him? Why did he not have his mobile phone with him? An 18-year-old on a day trip in 2026. Authorities have confirmed they are investigating online reports of an alleged altercation on the island, including a video said to show an argument and whether Nolan was involved. And if you watch Don Lemon's second show from today, you will see that, I think it's his 5 p.m. drop. It's like 10 or 11 in the UK. You will hear accounts from other boys of color who were on the island allegedly, and one of them claims that it was him in the video and not Nolan at all. So we just don't know. But what we do know is the young men who were on that boat in that picture have retained lawyers. And per the reporting, investigators had not spoken with them. The family's attorney, Ben Crump, says there are contradictions in several witness statements that have been given, and none of that proves anything. All of it, though, deserves answers before anyone declares categories. Understand, too, what the setting does and doesn't tell us. Horn Island is a genuinely beloved spot. The volunteer searchers from the United Cajun Navy who helped look for Nolan described the northwestern beaches as some of the most popular on the coast. And boat trips out there are as ordinary for Gulf Coast teenagers as a trip to the seaside would be for British teenagers, which is exactly why the gaps matter. Ordinary trips have ordinary explanations. A boy left behind on an island with no phone after a reported argument, potentially, while every other person on that boat lawyers up and goes silent, is not yet an ordinary explanation. It might become one with enough detail, with enough information, but at the moment, it's just a hole where an explanation should be. The family is doing what families now have to do in these situations, which is buy their own truth. They've commissioned an independent autopsy with Colin Kaepernick helping to fund it. Tyler Perry has offered to help fund the funeral. Crump explained the distrust in a single sentence. This is the state where Emmett Till was lynched. And at the family's press conference on Friday, Reverend Al Sharpton, who will be officiating the funeral, threaded the needle exactly the way tonight's covenant asked. Quote, "We're not bringing in race, but we're not discounting race either." Seems pretty fair to me. That is the whole sniff test in one sentence. Nobody serious is declaring this a lynching. Nobody serious should be declaring it an accident either. Not before the toxicology, not before the witnesses have been interviewed, not while a video of an argument sits unexamined in an evidence folder. On Friday morning, his parents gave their first interview, and his mother's words were ones that stay with you. "Nolan was this bright light," she said. "We just want answers. Not vengeance, not a verdict. Answers." And a word on why the family commissioning their own autopsy matters, because some cynics online have painted it as theatre, drama. An independent autopsy is not an accusation. It is a second set of qualified eyes on the same body producing findings that the family will then own and can publish should they want to, so that whatever the state eventually announces can be checked against something. In a high trust system, nobody needs one. The fact that in 2026, a Mississippi family's first instinct, before the state has even named a cause of death, is to hire their own pathologist, and the fact that a famous quarterback has to pay for it, is itself a receipt about the system, not the family. His mother said it plainest. At the end of the day, any parent would fight to find out if anything happened to their kid. I would. That's not a conspiracy theory. That is parenting. The investigation is live. Witnesses on the island that day are being asked to come forward, and we will follow it in this cafe until the answers arrive. And here is exactly where it stands as I record this. Nolan's body was found face down in the water near the shore by a National Park Service agent. That island is part of a national seashore. The state has now completed its autopsy, but has not released cause of death. They are still waiting on toxicology. The family's independent autopsy, flown to a pathologist in Washington with no ties to Mississippi, is done. And Ben Crump says the results are expected very soon, and the family will be making them public because they want transparency. And as such, they are offering their own transparency. The sheriff's office has put out a fresh public appeal for anyone who was on the northwest tip of Horn Island that day to hand over photos or video. And I'll quote their own words, particularly those depicting alleged altercations. So if you have those, please, well, take a copy at least, pass them to the family via Ben Crump, pass them to the sheriff's office, who should be given the opportunity to conduct an honest and fair investigation. Even a local official, a black man named Ramsey, said the honest thing that until the autopsies are out, anyone jumping to conclusions in either direction does the family a disservice. That is the sniff test, spoken by the system itself. Hold the categories until the evidence arrives. And a quick note on the funeral, because it says something about who this family is. Reverend Sharpton, who will officiate, did not frame this as a rally or a protest. He said he sees this service as a way to seek justice and unity. And then he said this: we want everybody, black, white, everybody to come, to lift up the spirit of this young man and stand with the family and say, you matter, your child matters. That is the posture of people with nothing to hide and everything to lose. And it's the opposite of the mob their critics keep describing, so they can just shut up and fuck off. They're not demanding a villain, they're demanding a file. And now the receipt that made this a case I had to bring you tonight, the coverage. And we'll come back to this. Because for the first several days after an 18-year-old's body came off that island, the mainstream news was near enough silent. Okay, you crack on, Martin. Good lad with your article. You do some beautiful work. Yeah, everybody read Martin's articles. They are very, very well written. Here's what I watched happen in this case. Earlier in the week, on Monday, the only people I saw covering Nolan properly were Don Lemon and the team at Law and Crime on YouTube. And then throughout last week, the story was picked up and kept alive far more by Black and brown content creators, one after another, refusing to let it disappear. As I said, Law and Crime, they're very, very white. And there was a young woman whose name has completely fallen out of my head, who was very respectful. If you watch Don Lemon's videos from earlier in the week, you will see her because he has her on as a guest. She just asked the question, if the colors were reversed, if it was 3 black boys and 1 white boy, and the white boy didn't come home and was then found a couple of days later dead, would those black boys be lawyering up and removing their social media? They'd be in handcuffs, that's for sure, in my opinion. So, from the bottom up, the way these stories now have to travel. And it was Ben Crump and Al Sharpton standing behind the parents that finally forced it onto the national radar at all around midweek. I want to be precise about that because it's the receipt. It was not the networks that made America look. It was independent voices. And overwhelmingly, it was voices of color. And then a civil rights lawyer at a podium. hold on to that, please, because we come back to it at the end. And if you want to follow the case now, I will put good sources in the show notes. CNN, NPR, Rolling Stone have done the work, but once the story was too big to ignore, but they have done the work. Hey, Chris, we were just talking about you earlier. So let's move on to case number 2. Tania Miller and the silence around a park in Miami. Case 2 is the one that you might have seen on your feeds before you ever saw it anywhere else. And this is the most delicate segment of the night. Tania Nicole Miller, Nikki, to the people who loved her, 27 years old, from Flint, Michigan. Before we proceed, 2 things. 1, if this section will be talking about suicide, and if that is going to cause you any distress, then please, please, please come back in 10 minutes or pick the video up another time, because, you know, you don't need that. Also, sit with where Tania was from, Flint, Michigan, because it matters to how people hear officialdom. Flint. For those of you who don't know, this was the city whose taps ran poison for years, while officials at every single level insisted the water was fine, insisted the tests were fine, insisted the worried mothers were just hysterical. Until the receipts finally buried the reassurances. If you grew up in Flint, you didn't learn that official statements are lies. You learned something more precise and more relevant to tonight. That an official statement is a claim, not a fact, and that the gap between the two is where your children live. Now, on the morning of Thursday, the 18th of June, might not be significant, might be. At about 6:20 a.m., Tania was found dead at or near Gwen Cherry Park in Miami, in the Liberty City area. She'd been found hanged. And I want to acknowledge before anything else why that single fact lands the way it does. A young Black woman found hanged outdoors in a public park in America the day before Juneteenth. There is 400 years of history in that image, and pretending otherwise would insult everyone listening. Statistically, Black women are the least likely to end their lives in this manner. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, just interesting. So here's what officials have said. The Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office, in a statement from Sheriff Rosie Cordero Stutz, said, detectives and the medical examiner conducted a thorough investigation examining the scene, the evidence, and the circumstances, and that the death is being investigated as an apparent suicide with, in their words, no evidence of foul play. Ta-ta, Gordon, you take care. By the 22nd of June, 4 days after she was found, that was the public posture, delivered largely through a Facebook statement, because that's how we communicate these days. While, per the reporting, elements like toxicology still remained pending. And for roughly 2 weeks, that Facebook post was very nearly the entire official record. Almost no mainstream coverage. A woman found hanged in a public park in a major American city, and the loudest sound was again crickets. And yes, Chris, you're right. Black people statistically do not hang themselves because they know their history, and Black women even less than Black men. Now, the covenant demands that I give you the complications, and there are real ones because the viral version of this story got important details wrong, and correcting them is how we keep our credibility and honor her. The viral post said she'd traveled to Miami to celebrate Juneteenth. Now, her own family told NBC6 she'd been in Miami since February, and records reported by Snopes place her in Miami as far back as last year. The sheriff's office, for what it's worth, never actually specified in its statements that she was found hanging from a tree. That detail came from social media. She was found with all of her belongings, and a local advocacy organization has said that she was known to them and receiving support from them, which tells us she may have been in a more vulnerable season of life than the happy holiday trip framing suggests. Her aunt aunt traveled to Miami, identified her, sat down with the investigator and the medical examiner, and came away saying the family she spoke for accepts it was suicide. And her sister does not. Terry Miller stood up at a press conference with the Miami-Dade NAACP and rejected the finding outright. Her sister. While also notably pushing back on the strangers turning her sister into some kind of symbol online. Quote, if anybody knew my sister, Tania Nicole, that's the last thing she would do. She loved life too much. So where does the sniff test land on this one, honestly? Not on lynching. The evidence made public does not support that claim at this point in time. And even her grieving sister called out the people wishing it into one. It lands on process. A conclusion was announced within days through social media while tests were still pending, with almost none of the underlying findings released about a category of death, a Black person found hanged in a public place, that this country has historically gotten catastrophically wrong. We've been here before, mamacitas, and recently. In the summer of 2020, two Black men, Robert Fuller and Malcolm Harsh, were found hanged in public places in California, and officials in both cases moved quickly to call them suicides. The public refused to accept a press release as an autopsy, quite rightly. And you know what happened? Full investigations with the families involved, with the evidence walked through openly, and both deaths were confirmed as suicides. And crucially, the families said they accepted it because this time they had been shown, not told. That is the entire lesson. The remedy for doubt was never a firmer press release. It was transparency. Tania Miller's family split down the middle between an aunt who's seen a file and a sister who hasn't deserves exactly that. Release your workings out. Show the timeline, the scene findings, the toxicology when it lands. If the conclusion is sound, sunlight costs nothing, and a family gets to grieve one loss instead of two. And one more receipt because it belongs to the pattern. It took a hashtag, Justice for Tania, and reposts from Black Lives Matter and on TikTok to get this story any oxygen at all. People then pointed at the messy, sometimes wrong, viral claims as a reason to dismiss the whole thing. Well, they got that information wrong. Clearly, there's nothing to see here. But hear the order of operations. Silence came first. Speculation filled the vacuum that officialdom and the press left open. If you starve a grieving public of facts, they have to feed on rumour and innuendo and supposition and conspiracy theories. And then, this is the trick to watch for everywhere. The rumours get used to discredit their grief. And notice again, who did the work of refusing the silence? The place I personally saw Tania's death covered at all was Joy Reid, who took it up on her show. And it reached me only because my co-host, Laura, not Luma, had already flagged it to me as one more in a pattern she's been noticing. Black people found hanged. Deaths ruled suicide. Precious little investigation shown. So one name I can point you to with confidence then is Joy Reid. And I'll gather other good coverage in the show notes. But sit with how thin that is. For a woman found hanged in a public park in a major American city, the honest answer to who covered this is a very short list. I keep noticing the same thing across these cases. And I'm going to say it plainly at the end, so please stick with me just a little bit longer. And watch what else grew in that same vacuum, because it proves the point from the opposite direction. Alongside the people crying lynching, a second online crowd sprang up insisting the entire story was a hoax. Can you believe it? That Tania Miller didn't even exist, pointing at mismatched birth dates and mixed up photographs circulating on the posts. A real young woman, really dead, really mourned. And the information void was so total that the internet split into people inventing her murder and people denying her existence. Well, the truth, a name, a family, an unreleased file, sat with a sheriff's office who'd said its piece on Facebook and then gone quiet. Both mobs are children of the same silence. And a last procedural receipt for your folders. As the Miami Times noted, ruling a death a suicide is a formal legal process conducted by a medical examiner. Required. So the file does exist. The scene examination, the interviews, the examiner's reasoning, they are sitting in a drawer in Miami-Dade. Nobody's asking officials to invent anything. They're asking them to open the drawer. A little care note here, my loves, before we move on. If any of this is starting to feel heavy on you, I'd like to remind you of the numbers that we mentioned at the top of the show. In the UK, you can speak to somebody at Samaritans on 116 123. That's Samaritans in the UK on 116 123. They are there to listen. If you're in the US, you can text or call 988. That's, 988 in the US. Text or call. If texting is easier, you've got the option. You matter. You matter to me. You matter to a lot of other people. But if you're not sure, know that at this moment in time, you all matter to at least one person, because I'm telling you. Okay? Ready for case 3? I know. It's bad enough just those 2 cases, but no, I'm afraid we have more, because there's a pattern emerging. Case 3. And now the state's own hand is back on the trigger. Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, shot on his way to work. We go to Tuesday morning, the 7th of July, and Houston, Texas. Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, 52 years old, a Mexican national who lived in America for decades. He left his family's home at about 10 to 6 in the morning, the way working men do. He was a home builder. His family called him El Mundo Entero, the whole world. He and his wife met as teenagers in Mexico and decided, the way that young couples do, that they wanted a better life for the family they would go on to have. And America was where they chose to build it. The photo his family released to the press is him standing behind a birthday cake. He picked up his crew, including his own brother Victor, in his white work van and headed for a construction site in the East End, a heavily Hispanic neighborhood. He'd spent a year and a half assembling a work permit application, photos, employer statements, every appointment kept. His son said they dotted every I and crossed every T, and he was, in his son's own words, close to obtaining his legal status. At about 6:50 a.m. near Canal Street and Wayside Drive, ICE officers in 2 unmarked SUVs moved to stop the van. And here is the first receipt, and it comes from the government itself. The Department of Homeland Security has said its officers were looking for someone else. Not Lorenzo, not his brother. Lorenzo Salgado Araujo was not the target. They saw a white van and a man who they say resembled the person they wanted. Then, per DHS, he ignored commands and attempted to ram an officer with his vehicle, and an officer fired, in the department's words, in self-defense. He was shot in the abdomen and died at Ben Taub Hospital. The 3 other men in the van, including his brother, were then arrested by ICE. Now the sniff test. And in this case, it isn't a twitch, it's a fucking klaxon. Because almost every element of the official account has either been contradicted or is unverifiable. And the unverifiability is the government's own doing. First, the witnesses. The men who were in and around that van. The people who actually saw what happened have said through their attorney to the Washington Post and CNN that he did not ram the officers and that the ICE statement is false. Second, the cameras. There's no body camera footage because DHS says the officers had not been issued body cameras. And the department's official explanation for why that was and who was to blame, and I quote their statement, back-to-back Democratic shutdowns for delaying the equipment funding. I shit you not. Yeah, I heard that too, Laura, that they were trying to get them to self-deport. Why were they even taken into custody? They weren't the right guys. A man is dead. The eyewitnesses dispute the official story, and the government's answer to where is your footage is a partisan talking point. And that talking point did not survive contact with the local congressman Christian Menifee. Good for you, sir. Who answered with the obvious. If ICE did not have cameras, it is because the president and his party did not want them to. They control the government, the funding, and the priorities, and they chose. Hey, Miss Hughes. Third, the officer. DHS has said it will not release the name of the officer who fired, will not say how long he has served, and will not say whether anyone involved has been placed on leave. And notice who the eyewitnesses are and where they are. The three men in that van also have names, so we're going to say them out loud. Jose Trinidad Rojas, Daniel Tirado Pantoja, and Victor Salgado, Lorenzo's brother. And all three of those men were arrested by ICE at the scene and taken into immigration detention. The men whose testimony contradicts the government's account are in the government's custody. Their families just got brief phone calls. Meanwhile, the AP notes that unlike other recent shootings by immigration officers, almost no photos or video of this one have surfaced publicly, and DHS has released none themselves. What does exist is a bystander clip filmed by a woman named Juliet Martinez showing the aftermath. The black government vehicle angled towards the white work van, doors flung open, and a man on the ground bleeding, and as per the AP's description, handcuffed. Hold that detail gently, because it's one of the few visual facts that we have here. A dying man shot in the torso, in handcuffs on the tarmac. Whatever the final legal account of those 90 seconds turns out to be, that image is why the East End does not feel like this was self-defense done sorrowfully. Sorry, but it just fucking stinks. Fourth, the jurisdiction maze, and you are going to love this one in no way, shape, or form. Pay attention. This is the quiet scandal of the whole enforcement era. Who investigates when a federal officer kills someone in an American city? Houston's own officials say they have no jurisdiction because the shooter is federal. The Texas Rangers, Laura, we discussed those in private, just you and I wonder if the Rangers are involved, declined to investigate. So there's your answer, and my answer, because I asked the question. The FBI, an agency we spent an entire episode watching get captured, is investigating its own government's officer. Harris County District Attorney has had investigators at the scene, and the county's medical examiner has done the one piece of independent officialdom available to it. It's ruled the death a homicide. A penetrating gunshot wound of the torso. Now, careful. That is a medical classification, meaning deaths at the hands of another person, not a verdict of murder. But it is a formal independent finding that sits directly against the self-defense framing, awaiting a legal process that currently has no obvious venue. And we have an update. Did anybody see the Associated Press press conference from Harris County earlier? See, I keep working even right up to the last minute. So these are the notes that I took just an hour or so before we came on air. The press conference was given by Rodney Ellis. He was a commissioner. He is a commissioner for Harris County. And quote, he said, Lorenzo's life mattered. He had value. His family deserve answers. Local residents deserve answers. American people deserve answers. He went on to explain that the local district attorney, has opened a case and is following the facts wherever they may lead. He said Harris County's responsibility is to provide the resources for them to be able to do that investigation. Another quote from Rodney Ellis, quote, "We have not only authority, but also obligation to investigate." He also said, quote, "We cannot simply take ICE at their word." And he also said, quote, "I hope we have support of the Commissioner's Court." And one that really hit me, quote, "History will judge how this moment is handled." Well said, Mr. Rodney Ellis, sir. Then Sean Tier, the Harris County DA, stood up and stressed that they were investigating as they would investigate any officer-involved shooting, and that they're currently investigating with no support from the federal agencies, but will need extra resources. They're requesting the support of both the public and the commissioners of Harris County, and their priority, and we've heard this before, transparency and accountability, not whitewashing and scapegoating. Seems pretty decent to me. So watch that space. I hope that fits in well with the rest of my script, because it goes in one ear and out the other when I'm going through it. So let's look at the family for a moment, because these are the people who are left with the aftermath of these shoddy, half-assed investigations. I need you to hear how Lorenzo's son Ronaldo learned his father was dead. Nobody at the hospital would give him answers. And I, from what I've seen covered on the news, believe that is because the ICE agents stripped him of all his identifying documents. The family was made to jump through what their advocate called extra hurdles, which included biometric forensic verification, just to confirm the man was his father. His brother was there. And in the end, Ronaldo learned of his father's death from social media posts, later confirmed by local organizations and elected officials. From social media. His son stood up the next day and said his father did not deserve to be reduced to a headline, that he was, in his words, a husband, a father, and a job creator. Now, the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, has announced that her government will pursue legal action over this and other deaths, saying Mexico cannot stand silent for people, in her words, whose only crime is working honestly. Hundreds have marched in Houston. Good for them. There is a protest at City Hall this very weekend, and the context receipt that turns this from a tragedy into a pattern, by the Associated Press's count, Lorenzo was at least the 8th person to die in this administration's immigration enforcement campaign. Not one officer has been charged in any of them. Not one. In several earlier cases, video that later emerged contradicted the official account. We've all seen it. And one earlier death, which I hadn't heard about and shocked me to the core, 23-year-old man named Ruben Ray Martinez. Heard of him? No. Well, there might be a reason for that. He was shot at a Texas traffic stop in March 2025. That is not a typo. That is a year ago. It wasn't disclosed to the public for almost a year. That is the baseline of trust. This account is asking to be extended on. No footage, no name, disputed by eyewitnesses, investigated by itself. I'm sorry if we're feeling a little bit lacking on the old trust front. And the East End itself supplied the historical rhyme. You know, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure as hell rhymes. Without any podcaster's help. Among the mourners at the Canal Street Memorial this week was a woman named Janie Torres. 49 years ago, in 1977, her brother, Joe Campos Torres, a 23-year-old Vietnam vet, was beaten by Houston police officers and left to drown in Buffalo Bayou. A killing whose insulting punishments helped ignite this same neighborhood. Janie stood a few streets from where Lorenzo bled and said, "This was in 1977. In 2026, we're still looked at the same. No difference, just different times. Plain, simple." I have nothing to add to that sentence, and I wouldn't even dare try. Developments since have only sharpened it. Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia got the acting director of ICE, David Venturella, to confirm to her on the record that Lorenzo was not the target, that his brother was not the target, that they were hunting someone else with a removal order and administrative warrant. And listen to this, that he would apologize to the family for releasing Lorenzo's name publicly before his own relatives had been told. Well, cheers for that, buddy. Sport. He also promised her that every ICE field officer would have a body camera by the end of the month. That's great. Although, forgive me, that's a promise that would carry a little more weight if he wasn't already dead. The ICE agents involved have been removed from Houston, though nobody will say if they're still on active duty somewhere else. On the accountability side, the walls are still a maze, but people are pushing at them. As I said, Harris County District Attorney Sean Tier has opened his own parallel review and set up an online portal begging for any witness video. The Houston Police Chief, Noe Diaz, has now offered the city's resources to the federal investigation, and a reversal from the mayor's earlier claim, "We're just monitoring it." And Mexico has escalated hard. President Sheinbaum's government now says 17 Mexican nationals have died in ICE custody or operations, and it's filing not just diplomatic complaints, but civil lawsuits against the private prison companies, GEO Group, and Core Civic that profit from the cages. We looked into that too. This for-profit prison system and how it's being extended to the immigration service. One family's grief has become a diplomatic incident, and that is what happens when a death is not allowed to be shrugged away. And as has been mentioned in the chat, this morning, you've probably all heard about it by now, and my heart is very heavy having to tell you, but even as I was writing the show, it happened again. This morning in Biddeford, Maine. Of all the quiet places, one person was killed in a shooting involving ICE. As I record, that is nearly all we know. The Maine State Police are on the scene. The FBI is expected to investigate, whatever that means. And no name, no circumstances, no body cam has been released yet. Local reporters are counting it as something like the 11th fatal shooting involving ICE or Border Patrol since this administration began. It's up into the teens, I believe. I'm not going to tell you a single thing about what happened in Biddeford tonight because I don't know. And neither does anyone tweeting about it. I raise it only so that you'll watch out for it and you'll notice whether this killing gets the Widdicombe treatment or the Tyrin Johnson treatment. That by itself will tell you something, so keep an eye on Biddeford. Yeah, and as Illyby rightly pointed out, this person was here legally, a Colombian man with a social security number. I mentioned Tyrin Johnson. You all heard about him? No? Well, colour me shocked. It's about time we all did. I'm just going to get comfy because you know how with my fibromyalgia and all the rest of it, I get a little bit stiff. So, case 4, Tyrin Johnson, 4 a.m., Ida B. Wells Avenue, Memphis, Tennessee. Small hours of Sunday, the 5th of July, the night after Independence Day. Tyrin Johnson. He was 20 years old. A former Tennessee State University student. He was also a new father with a young child he adored. He'd moved to Nashville and was being groomed to take over the family construction business. He was a working man, a young working man. A new father with a young child. And he loved making music. He'd come to Memphis for the holiday weekend, and a family friend put the loss simply. He was nothing but 20 years old. Hadn't even started living his life yet. And clock this detail because it belongs in tonight's ledger of its own accord. The person who offered the alternative account of Tyrin's last minutes would only speak to the local news anonymously, out of fear for their safety. In a city where the ACLU is already in court alleging that people who document this task force are facing retaliation for doing so. A witness to a killing by that task force is frightened to give their own name to a reporter. Whatever the truth of that night turns out to be, a town where witnesses whisper is a town where the sniff test has already failed. Here are the facts as officially stated, and tonight's covenant means I give them to you straight, including the ones that complicate the picture. Just before 4 a.m., Memphis police responded to a shots fired call downtown near Ida B. Wells Avenue. Officers say they saw Johnson carrying a handgun and he ran. Police pursued him on foot, assisted, and this is important, by Tennessee National Guard soldiers assigned to the area. Police say that during the chase, Johnson turned towards the Guard members with his weapon and 2 soldiers fired, striking him. His family says they were told he was shot twice in the chest. Guard medics gave first aid. He died at the scene. So yes, he was armed. Bit like Alex Pretty was. We don't launder facts in this cafe, and that what matters. And a person close to him, speaking anonymously to local news out of fear for their safety, has offered a different frame for that night. And it's important we share that too. Tyron believed he was being followed by people who meant him harm, according to this person, and he fired 2 shots into the air as a warning. His grandfather, Evaniel Johnson, told the Associated Press the same thing. That Tyron had been jumped recently in Nashville and carried a gun for protection. Wary about being attacked again over some murky social media feud that was going on. And here's a fact that sits quietly against the shots fired framing. By Neuro. A review of state and federal court records found Tyron Johnson had no real criminal history at all. A handful of traffic matters, a missed court date for driving without a license. Not exactly the rap sheet of the bogeyman that the phrase armed male carried a handgun in the small hours of the morning is built to conjure. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's own summary is a study in the passive voice. And as a linguistics graduate, I find language matters. For reasons under investigation, the situation escalated. That is the entirety of the official explanation so far for why a 20-year-old father is dead. Now, widen the lens here, because the sniff test here is less about the 4 seconds of the shooting, which none of us witnessed, and everything about the machinery around it. Who shot him? Not Memphis police, soldiers. National Guard troops patrolling an American downtown as part of the Memphis Safe Task Force, a force created last September by presidential declaration, blending federal agencies, local police, and the Guard, deployed over the objections of much of the city, in a city that is 63% black. A judge blocked the deployment order last October. An appeals court overturned her. The state's legal challenge is still working its merry way through the courts, which means the troops who killed Tyron Johnson were on those streets while the courts are still arguing about whether they should be there at all. Those soldiers are deputized by the U.S. Marshals Service on the day they join the task force. A paperwork baptism that turns a soldier into something like a policeman without all that messy training. No accountability history, and crucially, no cameras. Because here's the receipt that should not be possible in 2026. When asked whether the Guard members in Memphis wear body cameras, the task force's own spokesperson's answer was, to our knowledge, they do not. To our knowledge. The people who run the task force aren't certain whether their own soldiers are cameraed or not. They merely believe so. Tyron's grandfather, Evaniel Johnson, the same man who raised him and hoped he'd stay in Nashville that weekend, gave the Associated Press these words that could be tonight's show title. Show me the video. He isn't declaring his grandson a saint. He isn't declaring the soldiers murderers. He told the AP he's waiting to see the footage before he judges what happened. He is doing the exact thing the sniff test asks. Show me. Two state senators, Ramesh Akbari and London Lamar, have called for the release of any body camera and surveillance footage, and their joint statement contains the single most important sentence of tonight's episode. So I'm going to read it. Oh, Illy B. Illy B's got another one. I can't read it. Okay, I'm going to read Illy B and then I'm going to read this statement. This was just reported by the Sun Journal and reposted by Asha Rangappa. The little girl was still in bluey pajamas, no older than 3. She was trying to smell the flowers. At her side, a pink rolling bag. Her father, Juan Sebastian Guerrero, had just been fatally shot and yanked from a car he'd been driving. Now he lay handcuffed in the street, where he would remain for 5 hours. You took her dad. You took her dad, a woman nearby yelled, according to Cecilia Humiston, 22, who witnessed the interaction in Bideford on Monday morning. I'm so sorry. The statement from the senators, quote, whenever a government official uses deadly force, there is a heightened responsibility to provide an open and thorough explanation of the circumstances. Now, that doesn't sound exactly controversial to me. That is not a radical sentence. That is civics. And to their enormous credit, those two senators modelled tonight's covenant better than most of the internet has. Senator Akbari asked people not to jump to conclusions on behalf of either party, to see the investigation through and urge that it be swift and transparent so the public and the family can have some assurance. That is what asking properly sounds like. No verdict, all daylight. Contrast the first official instincts elsewhere. The mayor's statement on the morning a 20-year-old constituent died led with the assurance that all 4th of July events across Memphis were celebrated safely and successfully, and that this unfortunate incident occurred at 4 a.m., well after the festivities. The city's brand got the topic sentence. The dead father got the word unfortunate. I don't doubt the mayor's sincerity in letting the investigation run, but read those two statements side by side and you can hear the difference between a government that treats a death as a wound and one that treats it as a communications problem. And note who's gone quiet. Yes, you've guessed it. The White House. Governor Bill Lee and Republican lawmakers have not responded to requests for comment on the killing. Representative Justin Pearson of Memphis did respond, and we've all seen him being absolutely brilliant recently in the official buildings of his hometown. And his count is the one to hold on to. He said, this is the 4th time an American citizen has been killed by someone attached to this task force since it arrived. We knew this would happen. The task force has been in Memphis 8 months and has been involved in at least 5 state shooting investigations. And before that week was even out, it's happened again. On the Thursday, 4 days after Tyrin died, another man was fatally shot in a second Memphis Safe Task Force out-of-force incident. The same week, the same city, the same force. 2 bodies in 5 days from one task force in one mid-sized American city while the courts are still arguing over whether that task force should even exist. The ACLU of Tennessee's director called it a more ironic name than ever, the Safe Task Force, and demanded a full, transparent, and independent accounting of exactly what happened when soldiers opened fire on a civilian. That same ACLU is already in court alleging that people who try to film these patrols are finding themselves facing retaliation and, in some accounts, violence. So soldiers with unclear cameras, a contested legal mandate, a passive voice explanation, a second body the same week, and silence from every official who ordered the deployment. Tyron Johnson was armed, and that fact will rightly be central to the investigation. But being armed in an open carry state is not a death sentence to be administered by soldiers at 4 a.m. And a country that shrugs the question of what exactly happened has stopped treating his death as if it matters. He fell, by the way, near a street named after Ida B. Wells. Hold on to that name because we are going to come back to it shortly. And here's the coverage receipt for this one, and it's the starkest of the four. The immigration killing in Houston is getting real national attention now, and it should, partly because ICE and the protests around it are getting real national attention now. They are a story in themselves, and the networks are finally learning to cover them. But Tyron Johnson, I'll be completely straight with you. I hadn't seen this one covered anywhere. I only know about it at all because Laura, our Laura, not Luma, she's in the chat, brought it to me. A young father shot dead by soldiers on an American street, and I went looking this past week for the wave of coverage that should follow a sentence like that, and I could barely find it. No marquee national creator has made him their cause. The people actually doing the work are local and institutional. Above all, a reporter called Anita Wadwani at the Tennessee Lookout, a non-profit newsroom, who's been documenting this task force and its shootings for months, and the Associated Press's Report for America team. Yes, Miss Hughes. Miss Hughes is on the ball tonight. That is who I'm sending you to because they're carrying this almost alone. And a story carried nearly alone is a story one budget cut away from vanishing. If you've ever wondered what your share or your subscription to a local paper is actually for, it's for keeping a light like that one switched on. So, I just want a brief interlude to share with you the official words on each case side by side. So before we assemble the pattern, I'd like to indulge my fellow resident linguistics nerds for 5 minutes because I want to lay the 4 official statements next to each other and read them the way we read the mandate's chapter headings as documents that confess more than they intend. Here they are, the load-bearing phrases from 4 different agencies about 4 different deaths. First, Mississippi on Nolan. Investigating this as a death, not a homicide. 2, Miami-Dade on Tania. Apparent suicide, no evidence of foul play. 3, DHS on Lorenzo. Our officer fired his weapon in self-defense. And 4. TBI on Tyrin. For reasons under investigation, the situation escalated. Now, put your linguist hat on with me, because these 4 sentences written by different people in different states share a grammar, and the grammar is doing work. Notice first that 3 of the 4 lead with the category, not the facts. A death, not a homicide. Suicide, no foul play. Self-defense. The classification arrives before the evidence that would justify it, which reverses the entire logic of investigation. You are supposed to find, then file, not file, then find. Notice, second, the agentless constructions, the beautiful passive fog of it. The situation escalated. Situations do not escalate, mamacitas. People escalate them. But in that sentence, nobody did anything. An abstract noun had an accident and a 20-year-old stopped existing. His weapon discharged. Shots were fired. Officer involved. English gives us a whole toolkit for describing who did what to whom. And official statements about state killings reach with eerie consistency for the one grammatical mood that has no who in it whatsoever. And notice third, what all 4 sentences are for. None of them informs. Each one closes. A death, not a homicide, tells you which questions officers will not be taking. No foul play tells you the file is shut. Self-defense tells you the verdict precedes the inquiry. The situation escalated tells you that even the sequence of events is being held back while the conclusion is not. We did a whole episode once on words as weapons, and this is the quieter cousin of that. Words as doors. Every one of these phrases is a door closing politely in a family's face. And the reason this cafe exists, the entire reason, is to put your foot in that door and say, lovely phrase, now show us the fucking paperwork behind it, please. So there are the 4. A teenager on an island, a woman in a park, a builder in his van, a young dad on a downtown street. Different cities, different circumstances, different hands. I'm not going to stand here at midnight and tell you these deaths are connected by some plot, because they are not. And saying so would betray every receipt in this show, but I am going to show you what they are connected by, because it is sitting in plain sight in the sourcing. And it's worse than a plot, because a plot needs plotters, and this just needs a shrug. 1. In every case, the conclusion moved faster than the evidence. A death, not a homicide, before a cause of death even exists. An apparent suicide, no foul play, on Facebook within days. Findings unreleased. Self-defense announced while the eyewitnesses were still in custody, saying otherwise. The situation escalated for reasons under investigation. 4 deaths, 4 instant narratives, 0 published workings. The press release has replaced the investigation as the unit of official truth. 2. In every case where the state's own hands were involved, the cameras were missing and the names withheld. No body cameras in Houston, blamed on political opponents. No body cameras to our knowledge in Memphis. No officer's name in Houston, no tenure, no leave status. This is 2026. Every fucking teenager live streams their lunch, for goodness sake. The only people in America who somehow cannot keep a camera running are the armed agents of the state at the exact moments they kill someone. 3. In every case, the family had to beg, buy, or crowdsource the truth. An independent autopsy funded by a footballer, biometric verification obtained through, in the advocate's word, hurdles, a son learning of his father's death from social media, a sister holding a press conference to ask for a file. In a functioning system, the state hands the family the truth. In this one, the family has to hire Ben Crump and pass round a collection plate. 4. Jurisdiction has become a shell game. You all know what I mean by a shell game. Move them around so quickly. The city can't investigate the feds. The Rangers won't. The FBI investigates itself. The Guard is state commanded but federally tasked and marshals deputized. So everyone and nobody owns it. And the courts are still arguing about whether the force should even exist while it keeps shooting people. When accountability has that many addresses, it lives at none of them. 5. The climate. We spent 5 weeks documenting it in Blueprint for Betrayal. So tonight, just take the top line. At least 8 deaths in the immigration enforcement campaign. 0 officers charged. Earlier official accounts contradicted by video when video existed. 1 death sat on for nearly a year. The deadliest era in immigration detention in 20 years. Soldiers on American streets in at least 5 shooting inquiries in 8 months in one city. None of tonight's cases happened in a vacuum. They happened in a country that's been methodically taught by repetition that some deaths just get a shrug. And 6, the one that makes this cafe's job everyone's job, the vacuum. Tania Miller's death went nearly uncovered for a fortnight. Uncovered by media, I mean, not discovered. Ruben Ray Martinez's death went undisclosed for a year. Nolan Wells' story broke nationally only when Crump and Sharpton stood behind his parents. Silence is not neutral. Silence is the growth medium of both injustice and conspiracy theory alike. And the antidote to both is the same boring, holy thing. Facts published promptly, showing the workings. A pattern of indifference doesn't need a conspiracy. It only requires permission. Tonight, we are withdrawing ours. So what would passing the sniff test actually look like? Because we don't just diagnose in this cafe. Here is the checklist. The perfectly ordinary, achievable checklist that would make every one of tonight's cases smell right. Oh my God, Illyby, I can't bear it. Illyby is just updating us, so unverified by me, but Illiby's been on the money so far. HHS just reported the man murdered in Maine was not their target. Not their target. Dead still, but not their target. And Laura's confirming it. So, the checklist. Notice how modest our demands are. Publish the autopsy findings and timelines as soon as they're complete, especially where the public conclusion arrived early. Release the footage, body cameras, surveillance, dash cams, or explain on the record and in detail why none exists. Name the officials who use deadly force as standard policy, the way most major police departments already have to. Interview every witness before characterizing what they saw. Give families a liaison and the file, not a Facebook post and a fundraising page. And where the shooter is federal or federalized, create one clear, independent investigative door. Because self-investigation is not investigation, it is filing. Stop letting them mark their own fucking homework. Now, nothing on that list that I just suggested presumes guilt. Every item on it protects the honest officer as much as the grieving family, which is precisely how you know that resisting this is a choice. Let me put a British receipt on the table for my UK mamacitas and for the principle of it, because none of this is some utopian dream. Other democracies simply do it. In England and Wales, when someone dies violently, unnaturally, or in the custody or at the hands of the state, the law does not permit a press release to be the last word. An inquest is held in public before a coroner. The evidence is walked through in the open. The family has a right to be there, to be represented, to ask questions of the very officers involved. It's far from perfect. Just ask any bereaved family who's fought their way through one. But the architecture embodies the principle tonight is about. A death touching the state must be explained to the public, not merely announced to it. America, as far as I know, has no federal equivalent. And tonight you've heard 4 times the shape of that missing room. And on cameras, one more plain fact. Body-worn cameras were sold to America's police as protection for officers as much as the public. And departments themselves report they resolve complaints and clear wrongly accused officers. An officer who acted lawfully should be the person in the room most desperate for the footage to exist. When the institutions fighting hardest against cameras are the ones doing the shooting, the sniff test doesn't need any help from me. And for us, the watchers at midnight, if you were on Horn Island on the 4th of July, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department is asking you to come forward. If you were near Gwen Cherry Park on the 18th of June, Tania's family is asking the same. Support the family's GoFundMe funds if you can. They should not exist, but they do. Make sure they are official GoFundMes for the families. Back back the local reporters, the Tennessee Lookouts and Houston Chronicles and Miami Times is actually staffing these stories because national outlets arrive late and leave early. And when a press release tells you nothing to see here, you are allowed calmly, politely, receipts in hand, to say, show me. That's not paranoia. That is citizenship. And the watch list, what to watch for case by case before we round up. Because this cafe follows stories rather than, consuming them, here's your watch list. The specifics, checkable next steps in each case so that when the news cycle moves on, and it will, we don't. For Nolan Wells, the toxicology, the state's finalized autopsy, the family's independent autopsy findings, whether the young men from the boat are ever interviewed, and what that altercation video actually shows. If the state's account is sound, those 4 things will agree with each other in public. For Tania Miller, whether Miami-Dade releases the investigative file and the medical examiner's reasoning, the pending toxicology, and whether anyone in officialdom sits down with the half of her family still asking questions. The measure of this case was never the conclusion. It's whether the conclusion is ever shown. And for Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, the FBI's investigation's outcome and whether it's published, whether the Harris County District Attorney finds any venue to act on a homicide ruling against a federal officer, whether that officer is ever named or disciplined, the fate of the 3 detained witnesses whose testimony is evidence and whose deportation would be evidence removal, and the legal action the government of Mexico has promised. For Tyron Johnson, the TBI's findings and whether they arrive with footage or just adjectives, whether any camera or surveillance video is released, the appeal over whether the guard should be in Memphis at all, and the investigation into the second task force killing of that same week. Write them down, set a reminder, ask about them in a month. Institutions count on your forgetting. Be bad at it. Back to the question. Now, at the top of the show, I asked you to hold a question, and here is it is again, with the 4 people now in front of us. Ann Widdecombe was murdered, and within 3 days, there was a moving investigation, arrests, a Prime Minister's statement, a terrorism assessment, and coverage on 2 continents, and that was right. Nolan Wells came off an island and waited days for the national press to even notice. Tania Miller needed a hashtag and a wall of Black creators to be seen at all. Lorenzo Salgado Araujo's son found out from social media. Tyron Johnson was shot by soldiers and is being covered nearly alone by one non-profit newsroom. So why? Let me be fair, because this cafe is always fair. There are real differences between Ann Widdecombe and these 4, and celebrity is the obvious one. She was a public figure, famous for decades, and famous people command attention. That is simply how news works, and it's not sinister on its own. There are other differences too. Hers was plainly a murder from the first moment. Some of these 4 are contested or unclear. A country covers a clear crime differently from an ambiguous death, and that is not nothing. So yes, part of the answer is celebrity. Part of it is clarity. I will not stand here and pretend those things play no part, because they do, and you'd know I was lying. But here is where I have to be honest with you about the question I cannot fully answer, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because that on its own would be disrespectful. Can we be certain, hand on heart, that race is not a factor in any of these, because I am not certain of that. I'm not. And I noticed something sitting here that I cannot unnotice. In case after case, the people who had to fight hardest just to get these deaths looked at, just to earn the ordinary attention that somebody who looks more like me receives almost automatically. The people in this case who were fighting for it were black and brown people. They were fighting for a floor to start from, fighting to be entitled to the bare minimum that others are handed without even having to ask. And I find myself thinking, aren't they tired? Aren't black and brown people tired of fighting generation after generation after generation? I would be tired, exhausted, in fact, of having to campaign just for the starting line. And that leads me to two questions, and I want to be truthful about who they belong to. They are not questions I get to answer, and it would be arrogant of me to try. The first is for me and anybody else who looks like me, anyone who gets the benefit of the doubt without ever having to ask for it and not even realizing it's happening. Are we doing enough? When those stories flicker past, do we share them? Do we say the names? Do we give them our attention, which costs us nothing and is worth so much? Or do we just scroll on because it isn't our floor being fought for? I see so many black and brown people fighting this fight time and time and time again. And I find myself wondering whether more of us, the more easily heard, ought to be standing in it too, using the megaphone we were handed by an accident of birth. I think the answer is yes. I think we are not doing enough. I think I'm not doing enough. And tonight is one small attempt to do just a little more. And the second question is one I genuinely cannot answer, and I would not presume to. So I'm asking it out loud, and then I am going to listen. And I am so delighted at that point Evie Bateman has joined us, because she is an absolute champion of teaching white people, people who look like me, about racism, about how they might just be a little bit racist on the inside, and about being okay at looking at that racism, being okay at saying, yes, I am a little bit racist, and trying to find a way to be less racist, trying to find a way to see our white privilege, because yeah, it's hard to see something that you don't know is happening until you talk to a black or brown person and realize your lived experiences are very different. And I don't do that enough. And my own niece is mixed race, and I never ask her, how does it feel to be you, honey? What do you have to go through? How is your life different to mine? What concerns do you have that I will never, ever know? So, as I said, the second question, the one that I can't answer, asking it out loud, and I'm here to listen. To the black and brown people in this cafe, to anyone listening, watching, I hope there are many of you. How do you want us to help? Not how do I assume you want my help. How do you actually want it? What is useful? What is just noise that makes me feel better? Tell me, tell us in the comments, in the chat after this, by email, by phone, that just all the ways. Tell me and I will listen. We will listen. We will try to do it right and we will get things wrong. And then we'll try again because you'll tell us, you didn't get that right. And I'll say, thank you. I was trying and I apologize for not having got it right. Tell me what I need to do to correct. I would rather ask the question and risk looking foolish than to answer it on behalf of the Black and brown communities and get it comfortably, silently wrong. That is the question tonight leaves open on purpose. Please find people who can answer this question for me. Find people who have the experience that can tell me, this is what we need you to do. This is what we don't need you to do. And for the love of God, this is what we need you to stop doing. Because I really want to help, because I am sick of hearing of Nolan Wells's, of Tania's, of Lorenzo's, of Tyrants, and of all the other Black and brown people that die every single day. And we have to go scrabbling to find out about them. So that brings us to the end of the content, just in time. If you enjoyed the show, please recommend us to a friend. If you didn't, why not recommend us to an enemy, and then we're all winners. Thank you to my wonderful team, to Summer for being my fellow co-creator and publicity person, for Laura being a co-presenter, and my booker chasing down wonderful humans like Ty Cobb, who will be joining us next week to have a look at what we covered in Blueprint for Betrayal. So if you're a fan of Ty Cobb, come here next week. Let me know what you want me to ask Ty. I will be happy to. To Amy, who's our unofficial, unpaid, but very much loved admin, and to the beautiful Chris Palomino and her splendid artwork that keeps us all motivated and inspired to fight. If you would like to stay for the closing reflection and prayer, I would very much love to share that with you. If it's not your cup of tea, we send you on your way with love, and thanks for being here. Please subscribe, like, share, do all the things. The show notes and all the receipts and a companion guide will be available for the paid subscribers after the show. So if you want a little bit extra, you got to give a little bit extra. Sorry. I've tried to keep it as cheap as I possibly can. So, closing reflection. The woman who counted. She's already been mentioned. Tyron Johnson died a few steps from a street sign bearing the name Ida B. Wells. And I cannot let tonight close without telling you why the name on that sign above that pavement is almost more than a heart can hold. So when you're ready, I'll begin. 130 years ago, when Black people were being lynched across the country and the official record was a shrug. I am a very cheap date. Thank you, Gordon. When the newspapers printed the mob's version and the coroners wrote, "Death at the hands of persons unknown." One woman, a journalist from Memphis, of all the cities on God's earth, Memphis, decided that if the state would not count the dead honestly, she would. Ida B. Wells. She gathered the names, she checked the stories against the facts, case by case, and published what she found. At the cost of her printing press, The mob burned down her printing press. She nearly lost her life. She had a line that this cafe might as well carve out over our sign. The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. And do you know what made her start counting? It was not an abstraction. In March of 1892 in Memphis, 3 of her friends, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart, respectable men who ran a grocery store that was doing a little too well for the white competition's liking, were taken from a jail cell and lynched. The official story blamed the victims the way official stories did. And Ida B. Wells, who was actually godmother to Thomas Moss's little girl, refused the story she was being told. She went and checked case after case across the South and discovered that the comfortable explanations dissolved on contact with facts. That refusal, one grieving woman declining to accept a press release about her friends, became the anti-lynching movement and a body of journalism America still teaches. Her paper was burned for it, and she could never safely live in Memphis again. The city has a street with her name on it now. And last Sunday, at 4 a.m, a 20-year-old father died beside it. To a one-sentence explanation with no who in sight. She wasn't a conspiracy theorist. She was the opposite of one. The conspiracy theorists of her day were the officials, spinning comfortable stories over uncomfortable bodies. What Ida B. Wells did was receipts, names, dates, circumstances, published so that no death in her ledger could be shrugged into silence. And a century on, a 20-year-old father fell beside her name. And a teenager's mother is buying an autopsy. And a sister is asking to see a file. And a son is learning about his father from social media. The tools have changed. The job has not. Every hashtag demanding a file, every independent autopsy, every local reporter at a sheriff's press conference, every one of you sharing a receipt instead of a rumor is standing in that woman's light. And notice, she is the answer to the question I left open. When I ask, are we doing enough and how do we help? Ida B. Wells already showed us one answer more than a century ago. You count, you amplify, you lend your name and your attention to the people fighting just to be seen, and you refuse, flatly refuse, to let a single death be shrugged into silence. These deaths have not stopped mattering, mamacitas. Some of the powerful continue to act like they don't matter. And the distance between those things is exactly the space where we get to choose who we are. We say the names. Nolan, Tania, Lorenzo, Tyron, and we keep the light on. So I was reminded to close while writing tonight's show of an old folk hymn that was actually commissioned by Christian Aid for their organization. I don't know if you're familiar with it in the US or whether it's a UK thing, I don't know, but it's called When I Needed a Neighbor. And there was especially one line of it that keeps going around in my head. And I'm not going to sing the whole hymn because A, copyright, and B, as we all know, I sing like a cat being strangled. But the refrain in it goes something like this. And the creed and the color and the name won't matter, were you there? Oh God, that was really bad. I'm so sorry. And the creed and the color and the name won't matter. Were you there? I'll put a link to the whole hymn in the show notes. I found the official version on YouTube from the people who own the rights to it. So that should be safe. And I'd strongly recommend you go and listen to it because it's just been buzzing around my head. Were you there? That's the question living underneath tonight's question. Not did those four matter? They did. They do. But this, when they needed a neighbor, were we there? And it chimes with a pledge from the recovery world that I hold very close when I try to live by. I am responsible. When anyone, anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA to always be there. And for that, I am responsible. Nolan, Tania, Lorenzo, Tyron, and the next name, and the one after that, and the one after that. Let's all be there now. God, however we picture you, or if we picture you at all, we humbly ask you to help us be there, to be good neighbors to everyone, regardless of creed or color or name. Hold the families of Nolan Xavier Wells, Tania Nicole Miller, Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, and Tyron Johnson tonight and every long night after. Comfort the mothers who made last dinners and the sons who learned from screens. Give the investigators diligence and the officials honesty, and the silent their voices back. Keep tender the hearts this news falls hardest on, and if anyone listening is carrying more darkness than they can hold, put a kind voice on the end of their line tonight. Make us people who count, who check, who refuse the shrug, and who show up for our neighbors. And then let the light of truth do what it's always done. In Memphis then, and in Memphis now. In your many names. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Sorry we went over a little bit. See you over at Glenn's. I've been Mama. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Don't forget Ty Cobb on the show next week. If you want me to ask him any questions, let me know. Just contact me through the DMs. I do read them all. It only takes me about a day at the most. But for tonight, my lovely, lovely Mamacitas, the cafe, I'm afraid, is now closed. Good night, everyone. Oh, yeah, we'll be back Thursday. The team will be back Thursday. I don't know whether it'll be me team, me and Laura team, me, Laura and Summer, but I'm hoping it's all three of us. So keep watching. We'll let you know. Good night.